Fellowship of the Ring today, so I'm going to try to keep these comments brief. Start with where we left off yesterday, because we didn't talk about consolation. We discussed recovery. We discussed escape to some extent. Tolkien then says the fourth thing that fairy stories or fairy tales or fantasy literature offers adults is consolation. And he says it's the consolation of the happy ending. But it's not the happy ending that you get in Disney. It's not, and they all lived happily ever after. It's the happy ending in that hope is not squashed. Now, notice that hope isn't squashed doesn't mean everybody gets what they want out of life. For example, those of you who have read The Lord of the Rings, or actually even seen the films, what happens to Frodo when he returns to the Shire at the end of his quote-unquote adventures? Does he... Go ahead.
It doesn't feel like his home anymore, and
right.
He's changed beyond being comfortable with it.
Why? Why has he changed? I mean, what's happened to him? As he tells Sam at one point, he suffers from stab and bite. Early on in the novel, he gets stabbed in the arm, he gets bitten on the neck later, and he gets his finger bitten off. And he goes back, and he says, the Shire has been saved, Sam, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to save the Shire, but it's not been saved for me. And Sam's like, well, man, this sucks. I thought you were going to come back and live to be a ripe old age. And Frodo says, not for me. Does he get that happy ending? No, he doesn't. He gets a different happy ending. Goes off and lives with the gods, etc., etc. Okay? So Tolkien says we need a kind of word. We need a word that describes the kind of happy ending he's talking about. Because it's not the Disney and they all lived happily ever after happy ending. So he creates the word eucatastrophe. EU catastrophe. Okay. We all know what this is. We'll talk about this in a moment. What's a catastrophe? Give me an example of a catastrophe.
Volcano goes off.
Yeah. Let's not just say any volcano. If the Yellowstone caldera were to erupt today, guess what would happen to almost everybody living in North America? We'd be dead. If Yellowstone went off like it went off about 650,000 years ago, it would cover most of what's the United States in about a yard of ash. Yeah, even here in Tennessee. Okay. Most of us would be dead because farming would drop to a complete stop. You know, the economy, there wouldn't be an economy, et cetera, et cetera. That's a catastrophe. NASA just announced the other day, I think it was yesterday, they just spotted on some near-Earth asteroid, I can't remember what the R stands for, telescope, a asteroid about 170 feet long, 170 feet long, that's supposed to zip by Earth this weekend. Zip by meaning between Earth and the moon. It was an asteroid about that size that hit Russia in 2015 and injured 1,500 people. It exploded in the atmosphere. But when it exploded with the force of about 30 of the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima. Now, if it hadn't exploded in the atmosphere and had exploded much, much closer to ground, those would have been more like 1,500 dead. Okay? That would be a catastrophe. If the New Madrid Fault that goes along the border between Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee were to suddenly rip like it did in a series of 3 earthquakes in 1811, 1812, formed Reelfoot Lake, made the Mississippi flow north for a while, etc. Well, I can guarantee you this building would be gone because there's a sinkhole under it. Okay? I think it's this building. It might be KOM. Pretty sure it's this one. We can only pray that this building would be gone. Those are all catastrophes. No, they are not. You know what catastrophe literally means? A sudden turn. That's all it means. So, Travis buys a lottery ticket, Powerball lottery, gets all the right numbers. I don't know what the thing's up to now, but let's assume it's up to like what it was last fall, wasn't it? I don't know, 14 billion, something like it. It's huge. That would be a catastrophe. Why? That would be a sudden turn in Travis's life. Or if I did that, why? I probably wouldn't be here on Friday. More than likely. A sudden change. We tend to think catastrophe always has to be bad. A young family, a baby is born. That's a catastrophe. No. Been there 4 times. That can be the bad side because you no sleep for the next 20 years, kind of thing, if you have multiple kids. So Tolkien says, so we have that part, and he adds this on. This is a Greek prefix, and it means beautiful or good. You go to a funeral or memorial service, and the person who's dead has what said about him or her? What's that?
Eulogy.
A eulogy. The logi comes from logos, means word, and the eu means a beautiful or good word. You don't hear somebody stand up and go, that Sherman was a rotten son of a bitch. He was just a dirty, rotten bastard, and he should have died a horrible, rotten, agonizing death. That's a dislogy. So when you diss somebody, the diss comes from the Greek dys. Okay? So a beautiful change, the birth of a child, the winning of the lottery. Maybe winning of the lottery might not be so good. Dumbledore will have some things to say about money when we get to the Harry Potter novels. Okay? So it's a good change. Tolkien says that this is the mark of every real, true fairy story. It's got this sudden good change that he then goes on and says it is a miraculous kind of turn, never to be counted on to recur again. That is, you can't expect it to happen twice. You win the lottery once, you shouldn't bank on it happening again. Okay? So, if he says that's true for fairy stories, then that should lead you to think, well, okay, then it's got to be in here. If he says that's the mark of a true fairy story, and he's writing a true fairy story, where is it in here? It's not the case that there can only be one, however. There can be a major eucatastrophe, and then there can be little eucatastrophes that kind of ripple on along. And as we go through, I'm going to point out several kind of instances. Let's jump from Lord of the Rings to thing I'll refer to till you're sick of it. Star Wars. Where is a eucatastrophe in the third original Star Wars film? Return of the Jedi.
Darth Vader going back to the light side.
Be more specific.
Going back to being Anakin and saving Luke.
Bingo. Father, help! As Luke's getting the blue lightning, and the Emperor's going, and Darth Vader does what? The camera zooms in, and we see Darth Vader's face. And he looks at his son, and his son's writhing in pain, and he looks at the Emperor, and he's writhing in pleasure, because he's a sicko, getting his jollies off somebody else's pain, etc. And what does Darth Vader do? There is good in you, Luke said. I can feel it. And he picks him up and he drops him down that whatever that chute is. Little flaw, by the way. I like to point out little flaws in things. He's the Emperor. He's supposed to be all freaking powerful. How come he doesn't do what Luke does when he fights with Darth Vader earlier, when Darth Vader pushes him into the carbonite freezing thing? And Luke goes, whoop, does his little, Jedi power thingy. Why doesn't the Emperor just do that? Hello? Dark side's supposed to be more powerful than the light side. Big, huge flaw right there, okay? But, yeah, go ahead.
According to the explanation of that scene in the books, he was in such extreme pleasure he didn't even know what was going on around him.
Yeah, kind of like what happened in the most recent Star Wars, when the other bad guy, can't remember his name. Yeah, Snoke, whatever it is, gets killed. He's totally oblivious. Like, come on, you're supposed to be seriously bad. You know what? Doesn't work for me. Anyways, so that's a catastrophe. Do you really expect that to happen? Not really. How about the first film? Luke's sitting there. He's getting ready to fire his blaster thingy, and Darth Vader's coming up behind, and all of a sudden we hear the cowboy. Well, where's the cowboy supposed to be at that point, Han Solo? He's supposed to be halfway across the galaxy getting ready to pay off his debts. But instead, he shows up. He shows that money isn't everything to him. That's a catastrophe. Okay? You can't count on that happening again. But Tolkien says the catastrophe only really works because it doesn't discount the possibility of discatastrophe, of the other kind of change, the really bad kind of change. That is, it happens when it looks like everything's going this way. Remember Star Wars? They're on the Millennium Falcon. They're going off to try to find, Princess Leia. And all of a sudden, what does Obi-Wan Kenobi feel? A sudden ripple in the Force, as if millions of lives. For Alderaan, that's a discatastrophe. Why? They're all dead. That would be Yellowstone erupting. Okay, that would be the New Madrid Fault erupting. That would be the San Andreas. I'm from California. The San Andreas finally, after 90 years, take that back, after 100 years, really ripping like it hasn't ripped in well over 100 years. The 1906 quake in San Francisco, that was on the northern end of the San Andreas. If the entire San Andreas just snapped, it'd be Katie bar the door, because all hell would break loose in the West Coast. It wouldn't just be California, right? So the importance of the catastrophe is Tolkien then says, here's the hope it gives. It gives a glimpse of joy. He calls this joy beyond the confines of the world. That is utter, complete, total joy, happiness. It's a joy and happiness that isn't to be found here. Why? Tolkien is Catholic. That's why. Tolkien is Catholic. For him, this isn't all there is. This is a precursor to a much richer, much more valuable, much more worthwhile existence, let's say. And what this catastrophe does is it kind of pulls the veil, separating this world from the world to come, and going, look. This is what you'll get if you stick it out here. You will have joy unimaginable. Okay? And he goes on, and in the epilogue, he relates all of this to then the Christian story, which we're going to leave out talking about. I'm a Christian, but I don't want to get into all that. If you want to get into all that, we can. he relates it saying, because Christianity is the story of all stories. It's the one story that if anybody really, really wanted to be true, that's it. And he says, and it turns out it is. It's the true fairy tale, so to speak. And in the essay, he has this sentence. Creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun, upon a recognition of fact, but not slavery to it. See, now notice what he's saying there about creative fantasy literature. One, it's founded upon. Its basis is the hard recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun. What does that mean? Things are so in the world as it appears under the sun. Life sucks. Life is how it appears to be. Life is not all that glimpse of joy, right? Take a look at America, the United States of America in 2019. Is everybody happy? It's pretty divided, right? And not just the United States. Go to Europe. Guess what? It's just as divided. Go to South America. There's problems everywhere. Are they unique to our age? Hell no. People who say, "Oh, the United States has never been more disunited." There's this little period back in the 1860s. It's called the Civil War. More Americans died in the Civil War than in all other wars put together. Okay? Pretty disunited at that point. So, creative fantasy is founded upon the hard recognition that that's really what the world is like. Notice, it is a hard recognition. Why?
Can't change it.
Is it that we can't change it? Or is it that we'd like it to be something else? Yes, we would all like the world to be something else. We would all like to, and I'll go on one of my pet peeves here. And I'm sorry if this is an ideology you follow, etc. Should I go there? I've got a colleague who has a door, and on the door has a variety of signs, and one of the signs is anti-oil, anti-gas, anti-coal, anti-fracking. And one day I was in a particularly snarky, bad mood. And I typed something up and I went and put it on the door. And I said, yeah, pixie dust and fairies and unicorns. They'll power everything for us. Okay? Why? Because no coal, no gas, no oil, are we really going to power everything with wind and solar? No, we're not. California, when I grew up there was an area just east of where I grew up called Altamont Pass, where they had these big, giant wind turbines set up. This is in the 70s, long before this reached, the rest of the country. You know how much energy those things actually produced? They killed more birds than energy they produced, because the birds are too stupid not to fly around the giant wind turbines. Okay. What about parts of the country that are covered with clouds much of the year? Solar? Not going to do you any good. Okay? There is one quote-unquote green fuel that greenies won't support. Nuclear. Why? Because it's got that word nuclear in it. Okay? So, the hard recognition. This is the world we live in. There is poverty. There is war. There is racism. There is hunger. There is hatred. There are people doing things that they shouldn't do to other people, etc., etc. It's not the way we want it to be. The things are shown in the world as it appears under the sun, upon a recognition of fact. That is, this is what the world really is. And then here's the big change, but not slavery to it. Because what does the not slavery to the recognition of fact mean?
You can try to do something about it.
You can be Michael Jackson and look at the man in the mirror. You can do what? You can try to change those facts. How? Let's leave green energy, the energy problem out for a moment. Let's go a little more down to earth and talk about some of those things that Tolkien said we try to escape from. Hunger. How can you individually help solve, quote unquote, world hunger?
Giving what food you can, or even better, funding money to charities that are trying to gather food.
Donate to charities that give food to the hungry. How else?
Just check in on your neighbor. Maybe he's not doing great. That's as simple as it gets.
Okay, check in on your neighbor. You're getting ready to get on 24 and there's somebody holding a sign. What could you do?
It's a good idea to have like a little bag or something of like those hot hand things, a bottle of water and stuff, and wear it for the homeless.
If you've got extra clothes. I taught a course a few semesters called Early Christian Literature of the Middle East, or Christian Literature of the Early Middle East, one of the two, where we read some of the fathers of the church, fathers and mothers of the church. And one of them, a guy named St. Basil, said, and it really made my students uncomfortable, because he said, if you have a spare, an extra coat or shirt in your closet, you are stealing that from somebody who needs it. And this was winter, when we did this. It was like December. And people were going, okay, that's a little hard to swallow there. Okay? But yeah, having extra stuff in your car, having a little extra cash. Why? Somebody's there, you give them $1, you give them $5, you stop at McDonald's. That's how here, close at home, okay, you can change that fact. How about hatred, anger? Somebody cut you off on the highway. You immediately, or not. Okay? That's how the real change occurs. Tolkien is suggesting fantasy is a way of doing this. Why? Go back to the recovery. It enables us to see how we were meant to see. What does that mean? It means the person who cuts me off isn't automatically an enemy. Somebody who's got their own battles, got their own problems, got their own issues, cut them some slack. Okay? Anything else with all of that? No, we can leave the essay aside. So, let's turn to the introduction. Sorry, not the introduction. The foreword to the second edition. Lord of the Rings was first published in 1954 and 55 in England. First volume, late 54. Second volume, early 55. Third volume, late 55. And then he revised it and republished it in 1965. When he revised it, he made corrections. He found errors and corrected those. Okay? And when he did that, he wrote this foreword. And I'm going to try not to spend a long time on this. But he tells us why he wrote The Lord of the Rings and how it came about. And it came about because he'd already begun writing other stuff set in this Middle-earth setting. How long before? Okay, he began writing Lord of the Rings shortly before The Hobbit was published in 1937. But he'd already been writing stuff set in Middle-earth for over 20 years. He started, in fact, during World War I. Okay? He was reading an Old English lyric, and he came across the words, Eala Arundel. Arundel means morning star. Lo, the morning star. And Tolkien took that and he wrote a little verse just on these two lines. And the Arundel, the morning star, becomes Arundel. Becomes a person. Well, Arundel Then, through many revisions, becomes a very, very major person who actually shows up in here. Because Frodo is given something that is related to Earendel later on. Okay? So, he begins all these stories, as I said the other day, because he loves languages. He's been making these languages up, and he's got to have people who speak the languages. And if you have people who speak the languages, the people then have a history. And so he's got to create a history. So he creates this whole mythological background. You can read all about it. You can get the 12-volume History of Middle-earth. All of his scraps are published, okay, about that. So he says, I talked to my friends, people whose advice I sought, and they said, Tollers, give it up, man. You're never going to, nobody's going to be interested in all this weird linguistic stuff. Go back to the stories. People like those. So I said, okay. And he starts writing what became The Lord of the Rings. But as he's doing that, which kind of develops out of The Hobbit, as he's doing that, stuff from these earlier stories he'd been writing on sneak in. He kind of implies here he doesn't have real control over this process. It happens. Stephen King once said, that what he likes to do in writing, he likes to get a bunch of characters and put them in a room and let them see what they do. He's describing those characters like they're real. Like, I take these characters, but you guys are all real separate individuals. You don't just exist up here in my head. These are people that only exist up here in his head. And so he creates a separate room in his head and goes, okay, now go in there and let me watch you. And as he watches them, he starts to write. Okay? So, Tolkien says, after The Hobbit was published, people wanted to know more about hobbits. He starts getting letters. The Hobbit made him internationally famous. Tolkien is about as egghead a person as you can get. He's about as nerdy or dorky, your typical English professor, as you can get. Okay? And he's getting fan mail, wanting to know more about hobbits and wizards and dwarves. So he writes this. Takes him about 17 years. As I said, it was begun shortly before The Hobbit in 1937. First volume was published in 1954. So, Roman numeral 23. Big, long paragraph in the middle of the page. He says, a lot of people have read The Lord of the Rings since it finally appeared in print. And I want to say something about the opinions or guesses as to what it means. The prime motive, my main reason for writing this, he says, was the desire of a tale teller to try his hand at, and I would put numbers before these things. 1, a really long story. Okay, did he succeed? Yeah. 1,200 pages, that's a really long story. Okay? 2, that would hold the attention of readers. I think you have to say yes, because The Lord of the Rings has sold over 300 million copies since it was published. Okay? And a lot of people have read it. 3, that it would amuse them, obviously. 4, delight them, obviously. And at times maybe excite them or deeply move them. I think that's pretty obvious. As a guide, that is, what did I have to use as a model for writing this? What I liked. This is the kind of story J.R.R. Tolkien liked. Is it the only one in the world there is? Nope. You need another example from the quote-unquote real world? Read Beowulf. Old English, Anglo-Saxon epic that Tolkien was a major scholar of. That's the kind of story you like. Read the Icelandic sagas. Those are the kinds of stories you like. Read the Welsh Mabinogion, which Tolkien read in Welsh. The kind of stuff he liked. The Finnish Kalevala, which Tolkien read in Finnish. Read that. He knew Sanskrit. Read the Mahabharata. Okay? So, he says, I had only my own feelings for what is appealing or moving, and for many, the guide was inevitably often at fault. In other words, a lot of people don't like this. Okay? Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring. What does he mean, or at any rate have reviewed it?
They didn't finish the book. They kind of just started reading. It's like, oh, I'm done.
Or they wrote reviews and never read it. Happens all the time, by the way. People will get a book for a book review and they'll read what's on the back page, the back cover. They'll read the first chapter, pull a chapter in the middle, pull a chapter towards the end. I've read it. Okay? And he says, and that's fine. That's fine that they don't like it. Because guess what? I don't like what they write. You don't have to like everything. He is saying here, an author doesn't have to be like a politician. Because a politician, I should back that up. Most politicians try to do what? Let's imagine I'm running for office. And this is one constituency, and this is another constituency, group of people, and this is another constituency. And let's say this group of people, I don't know, NAACP, in this constituency, KKK. And I try to appeal to both. But I don't do it in the same way. I don't come over to the NAACP and use the language I would use with the KKK, and vice versa. But because I want to get elected, I got to get what? I got to get some of their votes, and I got to get some of their votes, and I got to get some of their votes. Tolkien says an author doesn't have to do that. What does an author have to do? Shakespeare puts it in the words of Polonius to his son Hamlet, to his son Laertes in the play Hamlet. Above all else, to thine own self be true. I wrote the kind of story I like. Some people don't like that story. That's fine. I don't like the stories they write. Okay? And what Tolkien was probably talking about there was particularly one critic named Edmund O. Wilson, who wrote a thing, a review. Ooh, those awful orcs. He didn't like The Lord of the Rings. Why? Because it wasn't set in the real world. You should kind of know from the very beginning. The guy wrote The Hobbit. It's not going to be about 1950s England. So maybe just don't pick it up to begin with. Okay? Ray Bradbury, anybody know who Ray Bradbury, what he wrote famously? Dandelion Wine was one. Fahrenheit 451, a book about censorship, about burning books as a form of censorship. Bradbury found out in the late 1980s that one of his editors at the publishing house, and I can't remember what the publisher was, that one of his editors was silently, or had silently, gone through and in a late printing of the book, had removed all the dams and hells and replaced it like darn and heck. And he's like, you moron. This is a book about censorship, and you are censoring it. And then he says later, this is in what's called the coda to the later editions of Fahrenheit 451. In a later thing, he said, I got this letter from this women's group, I think at University of Iowa or something like that. And they wanted to turn Fahrenheit 451 into a play, but they want to add some strong women's roles. Because they didn't think I had enough strong women's roles. And he wrote him back and said, hell no. You don't like my story? Fine. Write your own. You don't think I have strong women's roles? Write your own story with strong women's roles. Clarice, by the way, if you've ever read Fahrenheit 451, Clarice is a really strong woman. Just so happens she gets killed because she's too strong, okay, for the society within the novel. Okay? So, he says, but there are a lot of people that like this. And he goes on and says, and there's still a lot of problems, but I'm going to take those with me to the grave. And he doesn't talk about that. And then he says, as for any inner meaning or message, there is none. Now, what does he mean by inner meaning or message?
There's no hidden symbolism. As far as, like, say, the works of, say, Shakespeare, where almost everything has a separate meaning.
Okay, possibly. I stick with that last word, meaning. He's not writing it saying, this is what I want you to think. In other words, he's not using it to communicate a moral, a central idea. That is, he's not setting out to do that. Tolkien doesn't have, as he's sitting there next to his notebooks, a board that says, preach Jesus. I said he's Catholic, etc. Preach Jesus. And how do I get Jesus in here? A lot of people think that when C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he was intentionally, with the first one, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, trying to preach Christianity. He wasn't. He wasn't. He had been having dreams for about 15, 20 years. And in those dreams, a couple of images kept coming out again and again. One, a big, giant, tawny lion. He didn't know what it meant. Another one, a fawn walking through snow, carrying packages and an umbrella. He's like, what the hell? Am I going crazy? And it was only after he met the woman that would become his wife that images were, so to speak, unlocked in his mind. And the fawn becomes Mr. Tumnus, the big giant lion becomes Aslan, and what he writes is a supposal. Suppose what happens in the Christian story happened in a world of talking animals. Notice, he's not saying make the Christian story happen. What would it look like? How would it be different? Because obviously, if you had a guy named Jesus in Narnia dying, the animals would go, so, what does that mean to me? I mean, he's a human. We spit on humans. So Tolkien says, as for any inner meaning or message, there isn't one. Does that mean there is no meaning or message? No. Why? Because he says it doesn't have, that inner meaning or message is not part of my intention. Okay? Intention. But everybody who writes meaning. That is, if they're a storyteller, they tell a story, and part of their personality comes out in that story. Here's an example. Tolkien says, page Roman numeral 24, he's talking about how elements of a person's personality or history find their way into a story. Bottom of the page. He says, an author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience, but the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex, and attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. In other words, don't go all psychoanalytical on me. Don't try to read this psychoanalytically. He says, the processes by which an author's experiences find their way filtered out in their writing, those are too hard to nail down. But then he says, but one has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression. What's he mean?
He's lived during a period of war, and that he knows kind of how it affects the masses.
Did anybody in here serve? Active duty? Iraq, Afghanistan?
I was in the Marine Corps, and we deployed with the Navy, so we were on a ship.
I've had, over the years, multiple guys. Back in 94, I had a guy who was in first Desert Storm, who was Special Forces in Saudi Arabia with Saudis going off, search and destroy missions essentially into Iraq, over the night and stuff. A variety of other things. Tolkien is saying you have to have personally served. You have to have personally been in war to fully feel the oppression of war. You have to know what it feels like to be shot at and to shoot. To understand that. Okay? But he doesn't stop there. He says, but as the years go by, it seems now often forgotten, 1965, to be often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914 was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. Okay, 1914, that's when England entered World War I. 1939, that's when England entered World War II. He said, guess what? If you were 18 years old in 1914, that was no different than being 18 years old in 1939. Okay? Tolkien did go to war when he turned 18. He was born in 1892, not when he was 18, a little bit later. He was 21, something like that. Okay? Notice what he says. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. Now, that's not the experience of most United States service members from either World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm 1, Desert Storm 2, etc., etc. Why? Because World War I was called what? It wasn't called World War I at the time.
The war to end all wars.
The war to end all wars. The Great War. Why? An entire generation wiped out. 20 million. Tolkien says all but one of my close friends. So imagine everybody in this room is your close friend. Choose one and everybody else is dead. How does that affect you? How do you go on after that? How does that affect your outlook on life? It says something about recognizing that things are so as it appears under the sun. Tolkien fought in France. He fought in the fields of France, the muddy fields. He participated in battles that involved men getting their heads blown off and guys having to crawl across the muddy fields and seeing disembodied heads staring up at them out of muddy pools of water. Well, that image will show up in The Lord of the Rings. Intentionally. Okay? So, he talks about the scouring of the Shire, and people say, oh, well, that had to be as a result of what happened in Britain at the end of the war. He says, nope. I thought of that at the beginning. Why? Because the scouring of the Shire tells us something about human nature and about the recognition that things are so in the world as it appears under the sun. We tend to think, oh, someone's going to go off to war, they're going to go do their quote-unquote glorious deeds, and they're going to come back, and nothing will have changed. No, everything will have changed. Maybe not at home. But the person who goes off and comes back is not the same person. Okay? Skip the prologue. Prologue's for if you've never read The Hobbit, and it also gives you a little bit of other stuff. Pick up with A Long Expected Party. Notice, A Long Expected Party. One of you pointed out on Monday the title of the first chapter of A Hobbit. An Unexpected Party. Tolkien links the two works right here. The Hobbit begins with an unexpected party because Bilbo Baggins has a fat, dumb, happy life. I mean, he's living in nirvana. And then Gandalf the Grey comes up and screws his life up by inviting a bunch of dwarves to come take him on a journey. This is a long expected party. Why? Whose birthdays are coming up?
Bilbo and Frodo.
Bilbo's and Frodo's. Bilbo's going to be how old? 111 or 71. Frodo's going to be 33 and come into his inheritance. 33 is like 18 or maybe 21 in our day. That is, he's now old enough to inherit everything. Well, how's he going to come into his inheritance with Bilbo still there? Is he going to knock him off? No, Bilbo's getting ready to leave. Okay? So we're going to skip a lot. We have all the party preparation. What's the real purpose of the party?
So Bilbo can sneak out.
Distraction.
Distraction so Bilbo can sneak out. What else? What peculiar habit, custom do hobbits have that we don't have regarding birthdays?
Everyone gets a gift.
Yeah, my birthday's coming up, by the way, so that would mean I would give you all gifts on my birthday. Okay? Kind of sucks. I think it ought to be the other way around. But they give gifts out. So, how many people do they invite?
Everybody.
Okay, yeah, probably pretty close to everybody. 144 guests. Why? 144 is the total number of their years.
What's the 144? Wasn't that just their close friends, like his friends?
Yeah,
Stuff
but
like that?
that's the 144 that kind of gather under the tent. But everybody in the Shire is essentially, they're eating, drinking, etc., because people are sneaking in. Okay, so they do this unbeknownst to Frodo, so that in Bilbo, in giving out all these gifts, can do what? Oh, here's one for you, Frodo. So we get to the party. Bilbo gives his little speech. He says, I'm leaving. And pick up with this page. "31, now goodbye," and he disappears. Gandalf does a firework. Okay. And Bilbo meets up with Gandalf back at his home. He doesn't plan to meet up with Gandalf. He's just planning on leaving. But Gandalf shows up. Page 32. He tells Gandalf, I feel old. Gandalf says, you're going to keep up with your plan, right? You're going to follow through with everything. You have wisely kept that ring secret, towards the top of the page, all these years. It seemed to me necessary to give your guests something else that would seem to explain your sudden vanishment. He says, you probably know best as usual. He goes, I do when I know anything. You're going, right? Yes, I am. I need a holiday. I'm old, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I'm beginning to feel it in my heart of hearts. Well preserved indeed, because people say he's well preserved. And what does Bilbo describe himself as? Stretched, thin, like butter that's been scraped over too much bread. Can't be right. In other words, there's something wrong with why I feel the way I do. Well, what else is there something wrong about? He shouldn't even be alive. Hobbits don't normally live to 111. Okay? So he says, I want to go away. Frodo would like to come, but I'm not going to tell him. So Gandalf says, right. So you left him everything, right? Top of page 33. The ring as well? You agreed to that. You remember it? Yes. Where is it? Envelope? Oh, looky there. It's not in an envelope on the mantle. It's right here in my pocket. Okay? He says, what business is it of yours? Bottom of 33, Gandalf. Anyway, to know what I do with my own things. It's my own. I found it. It came to me. He said, yes, don't worry. No need to get angry. If I am, it is your fault. It is mine, I tell you, my own. My precious. Yes, my precious. I, cue the Gollum voice. Gandalf. It's been called that before, but not by you. Okay? So, Bilbo kind of challenges Gandalf and says, if you want the ring yourself, say so. But you won't get it. I won't give away my precious, I tell you. And Gandalf says, it will be my turn to get angry soon. If you say that again, you will see Gandalf the Grey in cloak. He takes a step towards Bilbo. How tall is Bilbo? About 3 feet. How tall is Gandalf?
7 feet.
No. He's not a giant. He's probably about 6 feet, 5'11", 6'2", somewhere in there. Okay? But he's twice the height of Bilbo. Okay? And he's got a hood on, he's got his cloak on, and he's got big bushy eyebrows, and he has a big staff. By the way, the staff doesn't have a piece of crystal on top. Idiotic thing of Peter Jackson's. Okay? It's just a piece of wood. All right? So, this kind of scares Bilbo. He backs down. And what does Gandalf finally get Bilbo to do? Give up the ring, trust Gandalf. How does he give up the ring? Here, Gandalf, you take it. Nope. He puts it on the mantle. Okay. And Gandalf just kind of stays there until Frodo comes. Bilbo leaves. Frodo comes. He's got problems dealing with people. Chapter 2, Shadow of the Past. There are 2 key chapters in The Lord of the Rings for background information, what's called exposition. Shadow of the Past is the first one, and the Council of Elrond is the second one. The Shadow of the Past is the second chapter of Book 1. Council of Elrond is the second chapter of Book 2. Book 2 being the second part of Fellowship of the Ring. Okay? It's in those 2 chapters we get all of this background information that we need to fully understand the nature of the ring and the threat it poses. Not just to Frodo or the Shire, but all of Middle-earth. It's essentially those 2 chapters that tell us, let's put it in our world. Frodo's got a frickin' time bomb, nuclear bomb, on his hand. And he's got to do something with it. In one other part. And who wants the timed atom bomb? Satan. And he's got to figure out how to get to hell and destroy it. Okay? That comes at the end of Council of Elrond. So, Shadow of the Past. Strange things go on. Gandalf goes away, he comes back, he goes away, he comes back. 17 years pass. So Frodo's now 50. Why is that significant? Same age as Bilbo was when Bilbo had his eye-opening experience of going off and having a journey with the dwarves. So Gandalf comes back, finally, after 17 years, and he's page 46, he and Frodo start to talk about the ring. And the next morning they get up, and Frodo says, you began to tell me strange things about the ring last night, and you said we should wait till it's daylight. You say the ring's dangerous. How? Far more dangerous than I guess. In what way? Gandalf, in many ways. Last minute. Far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. So, what did Gandalf just tell us about the ring? What will it do to anyone of mortal race?
Possess them.
Possess them. What is Bilbo? Frodo.
Mortal.
He's immortal. Jump to the end. What will the ring ultimately do to Frodo? It will control him. What about Gandalf? Is he mortal? Yeah. We'll talk about on Friday. Okay, we'll stop there. I don't know if I had a quiz down on the syllabus for Friday. We won't have a quiz on Friday.